Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a few minutes and try and correct a wrong that I've seen out on the internet, or a lack thereof. There's no videos telling you how to adjust the truss rod on a vintage Rickenbacker 4000 series base, either the 4000, 4001, and I believe even some early 4003s up to about mid-1984. So I'm just going to take you through the procedure today so that you don't make the mistake that pops the fretboard loose. It's a very common issue on some of these older instruments. Okay, now first things first, what I've got here is a made in Mexico Fender Jazz 5 that has kind of a standard top adjusting truss rod. And what you'll notice about this truss rod is that it's pretty standard to most basses. They usually adjust from the top. Some Fenders adjust from down here underneath the pick guard, like the Precision bass that I have adjusts that way. But basically the principle is all the same. Every time you tighten the rod, you are flattening out the neck or giving it back bow. If you loosen tension on the rod, you are actually allowing the neck to relax, and the string tension tends to pull that forward. So doing that on a regular bass that is not a Rickenbacker will allow the neck to relax and give you some relief. Now Rickenbacker says that you can actually set a neck nearly completely flat, and some people are going to argue that, well, that just doesn't work with physics. But it does seem to be that you can set a Rickenbacker neck much flatter than a lot of other basses. But the principles of adjusting a truss rod should really be the same between all instruments. And the main thing to stress is that you need to be providing the work on the neck. You don't want the truss rod to do that. That's just poor form on any instrument, honestly. A lot of people think that they just crank down on a truss rod in an attempt to flatten out the neck and just crank until it gets as flat as they want it. Now, on a lot of instruments, they'll tolerate that, but a Rickenbacker is definitely one of those that will not. It has a dual truss rod setup, which you'll see when I take this cover off here in a few minutes. And it simply will not tolerate being tightened down and expecting it to do the work for straightening the neck. That is how you pop off a fretboard. So the main principle that we want to explore today is getting your bass nice and secure, such as how I've done on this desk here. And I've done that by using two clamps. We'll actually just take the camera out and go take a look at that setup here. Very easy to do. You can do it yourself. But basically, you're just going to take, in my case, two large wood-style clamps here, big C clamps. I I take some towels and put them on the desk itself, then take two pieces of wood so that you're not marring the finish of your instrument at all, and you secure it in such a fashion that it really moves the desk pretty well if I'm grabbing a hold of it. The principle here being that we're going to want to pull down and give tension on the neck, and this will, as you'll see here, have a tendency to flatten the strings against the neck. So one thing many sites will tell you is that you want to check a Rickenbacker's string relief, neck relief, with it sitting in a playing position on your lap, as you would normally hold it when you're playing. That's the best time to check it. People's preference for that varies as far as how much how much action they like in a guitar. I tend to prefer, since I have a heavy hand, I prefer to have a little higher action. But this Rickenbacker has now kind of gotten to the top end of what it should be, and needs to be brought down a little bit. And as you can see, the finish is all intact here. I don't know the last time this thing's actually had a truss rod adjustment. It could be years and years and years and years. The fact that everything's not mangled in here and that the nuts look in good shape is actually a great sign. Many people will say that because of the age of this, you should go ahead and put a little bit of penetrating oil here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You want to be careful of what you use. Obviously you want to be very gentle with applying it. Really only a drop or so is all that you need. And I'm going to put this tiny little cotton pad in here to soak up any excess. I don't want it getting into the finish of the guitar. So I'm just going to give it just the tiniest little spritz in each nut. All right, there's one, and there's the second little bit there. So any excess will be wicked up by the cotton here so it doesn't have a chance to attack the finish. I'm just going to kind of stuff it in there right around the face of the nut, and we'll wait about 15 minutes or so to give that a chance to break up any corrosion that might be on the threads there. So sometimes if the truss rod nuts are relatively virgin looking, such as this particular instruments are, you will need an instrument such as this little baby crow's foot basically, to sneak in under the front edge of the nuts and slightly pry them upward. Otherwise, there's no way you're going to get the 1/4 inch driver or socket that you need over it. Some people take to carving out a little more relief to get a tool on in the neck pocket here. If I can avoid doing that, obviously I will. I don't want to screw up the finish under there. Granted, it's covered by a plate, but principle alone means that I want to try and keep it as pristine as possible. That may or may not be possible. We'll see here in a few minutes. But in prying up slightly, I can see this nut here, the one on the base side of the treble or of the fretboard, has a little downward deflection. The one on the right side doesn't look to be as much so. So I'm just going to slightly sneak this in here and give it just a light tweak upwards in hopes of getting that just a little bit higher. Not using a lot of pressure here. Everything's fairly antique, so we want to treat it that way. But we'll see if we can get a driver on there. Now, the other thing I would tell you is you want to use only hand tools. You don't want to use ratchets if you can. So if you just have like a simple nut driver like this, I'm using a simple 1/4 inch adapter that slips into the tool here, and then I'm using an extension just to allow as low an angle as I can. If I had a wobbly 1/4 inch adapter or extension, I would use that. Sadly, I don't. But between the long socket, the extension, excuse me, and then the adapter, there's a little bit of a play here. So I can probably sneak this on here. Yep, it will fit a little loosely on there. That's the one side. That's the easier side to get on. Let's see if it'll fit on the other side. This one, maybe not so much yet. Yeah, I can force it on there. So that's good. So I'm going to hold down a little tension on the neck, and I'm going to slowly back this nut off. Oh, good. And that turns fairly easy. That's great. So the penetrating oil did its trick there. Well worth waiting the 15 minutes to get everything nice and loose where you want it. So now at our headstock end, we've got the driver installed on one of the two nuts. And at this point, you've got it clamped on the table, body's held nice and firm. You can grab that neck and you can pull it down, and you'll see those strings come in contact with the frets there. And basically what you want to do is just hold enough pressure so that those strings are held flat, and that's when you start to tighten the nut down. So I'm going to hold it flat against the neck. I'm grabbing right along the nut here, so you're helping reinforce the fretboard. Hold it flat against the neck and tighten down. And the reason you use a hand tool is you can't really generate more force this way than is necessary to do the job properly. I'm going to get it onto the other nut, and I'm going to tighten it down about as much as my hand will allow. This process is kind of a lather, rinse, repeat, and since I don't have a lot of experience doing it on these particular instruments, I may have to do it more than once. So I'm going to now remove it from the table and see how our action ended up. Okay, so I've adjusted it twice now, and I guess the third time may be the charm. I think part of the problem is that people have instilled in our minds that Rickenbackers are a somewhat fragile instrument. And so I'm taking my time. I don't want to overdo it, and I'm not afraid to go back and try it again. So I think the important thing to remember here is that I've been told repeatedly, and I'm trying to follow that standard, of backing the nuts off a little bit each time before you start. I'm not sure what the rationale there is, other than maybe you don't want the nut binding on the threads as you pull down tension. In any case, it's a best practice taught by Joey on the Rick Resource Forum, and I am following it to a T. So here we are, body securely clamped again. I'm going to go ahead and apply a bit more pressure. I've backed the nuts off, both of them, a little bit. And I think it's important to note here that I am adjusting each nut the same amount each time, especially since on this particular instrument, the same amount of truss rod appears to be sticking out of each end of the nuts. So I'm trying to keep it equal there. So we'll go ahead and apply pretty significant force this time because I really want to get it right this time. So I'm holding quite a bit of force and I am tightening it as much as I can. And I'm moving over to the other nut. And that one I'm able to get quite a bit tighter, but there was a little less rod showing through there too. So I'm hoping that's the ticket and that we're pretty much nuts on this time. And that's looking pretty good, but again, it's one of those things that you can't really tell until you take it off the table, put it in your lap again, and do the test of fretting at the first fret and then holding the string taut against the end of the fretboard down here, and then seeing what your relief is at about the 9th fret or so. That is a personal preference. Some people like it as thin as a sheet of paper. I like it a bit more than that, but so that you hear just a nice little plink basically when you're touching the string against the fret. And we'll see where we're at now. Okay, so now we've made our adjustments. I think everything is about where I would like it to be. Again, I like a little bit higher action than maybe somebody who has a really light touch and likes a super low action. Ricks are capable of that. This particular one I'm going to leave a little bit higher just for my personal preference. So, but checking it, I like to put my elbow against the string, fret it at the 1st fret, and check right where we are, right about the 9th fret. And I have just the slightest plink there from the E string, A string, maybe a bit more, D, also a reasonably small space there, and G, nice and low. Now I was noticing that I have a little bit of buzz on that G. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to raise the saddle on the right side. And since these don't have individual saddle height adjustments on a Rickenbacker, you're basically going to have to raise the bar on the right side. Probably half a turn to 1 turn would be more than adequate to get rid of that tiny little bit of buzz there. I have nice, even amounts of thread showing out of the top of the truss rod nuts there. And I noticed actually as I got my tool with the extension and everything on there that I was actually able to sneak it into the pocket without having to move the strings. So the 2nd and 3rd time I adjusted them, I had the strings back in their slots, again at proper tension, so tune them to how you would normally tune it. And so really the things to remember there with a Rickenbacker: tune it up to tension and make your adjustments while the strings are in place and at playing tension. Do equal nut adjustments on both sides. Use a little tool if you need to try and tilt the nuts up, because they have a tendency when you tighten the rod, the heads of the truss rods tend to angle back towards the headstock. So you'll use a little crow's foot will go a long way. Make sure that you loosen the nuts before you start the adjustment each time. It's just good practice to make sure you have a good free working truss rod and nut assembly here where it loads on the bearing plate, and that way you aren't tweaking on the threads of the truss rod at all. Other than that, I think that about covers it. I'll put the truss rod cover back on and this Rick's ready to go gig. Thanks again.